It's not easy. I guess that's something I've been thinking about a lot as I've kind of spent the last, I don't know, 15 plus years running around and doing way too many things. I'm generally into that, but when I find that it means I don't have any time to compose or practice music other than specific music I'm learning for a gig that's coming up. And what I mean is I don't get to actually practice nuts and bolts of my instrument or things I want to be getting better at, things like that. When I don't have time for those things, then I think, wow, I've really overscheduled.
Is that an artifact of how you're wired, or how much of that is just being how much you have to hustle in order to be a working musician?
I think I do. There's probably something about me that does thrive on being busy and have a lot of things going on. But I think also all the things I'm doing are things that I want to be doing. So I'm very lucky in that way. But then that also gets tricky because I don't really want to stop doing the same things, but at the same time, I want more time.
You know, I work in publishing, and I was forced to freelance for a bit. Everyone was talking about how great it is, and like, you know, how you can make your own schedule, and you can like go see a movie in the middle of the day. And I was completely miserable. Oh, no. Just like knowing that like everyone else out there was working and I wasn't. I just felt like just completely useless.
Yeah, I think for some people it really works, and for other people it's just stressful. And even for people who like it, sometimes it's stressful anyway.
There's also this thing of like, do you meditate ever?
No.
Have you tried to?
You know, I did more when I was a teenager, and I kind of got away from it.
The ideal is sort of like, you know, being able to sort of like turn things off, but then it's like, oh no, then now I have time with my thoughts. No,
that is tricky. You know what's helped me for stress management is getting away from my phone and the computer.
Yeah.
I think that's been kind of a key thing, or for changes I'm trying to make in my life. One is to not be addicted to my phone. And so I made like a tangible, successful attempt at that several years ago. And it started because I was on a vacation, and I decided I was on this beach vacation, and I said, I'm going to check my email once every day for 5 minutes to make sure there's no emergencies. And other than that, my phone's going to be off. And what I realized was it was great. I felt so much better, and I didn't miss anything. Like, there's nothing that can't, or very few things that can't wait 24 hours.
Sure. I mean, you know, and this isn't a way of saying that your job isn't important, but like, you're not an ER doctor.
Exactly.
Right? You don't need a pager on yourself.
I don't need to be on the computer all the time. Yeah. I need to keep up with things, but if something's an emergency, someone will call me, or, you know, so just trying to not get into a thing. Like, I don't wake up with my phone. I don't look at my phone or my computer for the first hour that I'm awake. I don't look at it usually a few hours. I turn it off like after 8 p.m. I try to not be on my computer really. And just those maybe check email twice a day, unless there's something I really have to be doing.
You're capable of unwinding.
Yes.
You can go to a beach and just appreciate being at a beach.
Yes.
Okay.
For sure.
That's one of the things I think about being a creative person in general, but certainly, you know, if you're like a musician or a writer, is that not only the freelance thing, but also like you can't really, nor would you want to turn off inspiration. Mm-hmm. So like in a sense, you're always kind of working, right? I mean, you can be Definitely. Inspired, and you need to, I don't know, do you need to like run to a guitar and?
Not always. I mean, yeah, sometimes you can get inspiration. Yeah. Actually, maybe more often than not, when you're not on the instrument, an idea might just occur to you. But most of the time, you can find a way to have that stick with you. But no, I think it's really important to get away from stuff, or just to escape music, you know, to not be thinking about music all the time, because you're right, it doesn't turn off.
What's your process, you know, if you are away from a guitar and something does hit you?
I mean, it depends on what kind of a thing it is. Sometimes it'll be just a larger idea, like I want to try a band with such and such instrumentation, or if it's something like that, there's nothing I need to do.
Like, I want to play the bassoon.
Right.
I want to get really into reggae, something like an idea like that.
Right. And then, you know, you just remember it. You don't have to do anything. But I mean, sometimes I'll record a voice memo or something on my phone if I think of something, whether it's an idea or a melody, or you write something down.
Is a melody generally the germ of the songwriting process for you? Based on what I know about you and listening to your music, that a lot of your approach seems to be just like different ideas that you have of things to do with the guitar.
Actually, I think sometimes a melody is the first idea.
Yeah.
But usually I'll just be improvising on guitar until I play something that I think could be the basis for a composition. Whether that might be a melody, it could be a sequence of chords or a rhythmic idea. Or sometimes it's a more general thing, like thinking about a specific feeling that I want a song to have, or a specific tempo or instrumentation or something.
I was listening to the Beatles cover you did, which is sort of, I mean, that's an interesting insight into your work, is working with possibly the most like saccharine, as far as Beatles songs go, one of the sort of simplest pop songs,
right,
and then deconstructing it in a way. Is that in some way emblematic of the work that you do?
Well, I don't know, because doing a cover is a very different approach, but with that specifically, what I tried to do was not go back and reference the original, because they asked me to do it. It wasn't my idea.
Sure.
Will you do a cover of A Little Help from My Friends?
It's a fun challenge, though.
It was a really fun challenge, but what I tried to do was just think about the aspects of the song that were stuck in my memory, without actually going back and listening to it and trying to figure out all the detail of what was happening, and just use the aspects that were the strongest to me, and then try to do something a little different.
So the entire process of arranging it and recording it, you didn't listen to the original at all?
I did later, but not at first.
Yeah.
So the initial ideas I had for it just came from memory, and then I did go back and listen to it to make sure there wasn't some aspect of it that I wanted to include that I wasn't. But most of it was just, and actually with that song, the melody to me was what was strongest. So I tried to kind of just think about the melody, and the harmony was almost secondary. Like it could have been, I liked the idea of the harmony being almost experimental behind this strong melody.
Is that something you feel like you would want to do again? You know, take an existing pop song and rearrange it?
I think not, unless it was a specific song that I felt really strongly about. I think covers are really tricky, because often when you want to cover something, it's because you love the song so much. And so how do you take something that you love so much and that you maybe even consider perfect, and then do something better with it? It's really tricky. So I think, I mean, I have done quite a few covers, but it's very hard. It's hard to think of how can you do something that is true to the original, but also maybe different, or offers something that's interesting when something is already so strong.
Sure. I mean, with the Beatles, you don't think you're going to outdo the Beatles.
Right. Oh, yeah. The idea is never to outdo, but the idea would be like, how do you offer something different, or just bring something out that you loved in the original?
Did you choose that song specifically?
No, the record label did.
Do you feel like that was a good starting point for you?
For sure. I mean, I love that song, and I love the Beatles. So for me, it was easy to think about doing that song. If it was a song that was less stuck in my memory, it might have been harder. But that song was like, oh, great. I felt like they picked the song I would have wanted to do from that record anyway.
Standards are such an important part of jazz in general, I mean, versus like most other kinds of music. You know, even the most established people tend to at least dabble in standards.
Yeah.
You don't have as much interest in that.
Actually, I love standards. I mean, I grew up playing standards, studying jazz. And it's something I got away from at a certain point, but I still actually practice them a lot and work on them a lot, because I feel like they inform a lot of things that I do, and it can only make you a better musician to work on that stuff.
That's just part of the process of kind of honing your guitar playing.
Yeah, or just, working on the harmonies and melodies and chord sequences and all the aspects of standards, and then also it helps your ear, it helps everything. So I sometimes I use that as a way to practice, even if I'm not ultimately going to play the standards very much. Just having that as material to get better at the guitar and for inspiration. A
lot of people kind of make the point in interviews and write-ups with you that you didn't initially take to jazz, but I mean, do you feel like that your initial, I guess, non-appreciation of it is kind of dissimilar from anyone else's? I mean, very few people really take to anything the first time they hear it.
Yeah, I mean...
Or were you actually reluctant at first?
I think when I first heard jazz, I didn't hate it, but it didn't strike me in any special way. But I think... It
wasn't like, this is it, this is the thing that I've been waiting for my life.
No, but then when I started really listening to it and I started getting into it, then I fell in love with it. But it was gradual. It wasn't like... It didn't strike me immediately. But I think it's like that with a lot of things. Sort of the more you listen and the more you start to understand all the complexities of what's happening, the more interesting it gets. There's so much within the umbrella of jazz to discover. So, no, I mean, I love it. And that's basically the music I grew up listening to once I got into it.
At what point did it occur to you that it was something that you could actually do? I mean, that's such a, it feels like such like a pipe dream. And, at this point in pop culture to be a professional jazz musician.
Yeah. It still feels like that,
Yeah.
I guess.
It's working out fairly well, it seems like. You're busy,
Yeah.
as we established earlier.
Yeah, and I never really expected that. I think I decided to become a musician at a certain point because I felt I wanted to so badly that I felt I had to at least give it a shot. But it was a very scary decision because I'm a very practical person and it did not seem practical at all. And it isn't practical at all.
You were studying science.
Yeah.
Biology,
Yeah.
is that right?
Exactly.
And at one point in school, you decided that you were going to go a very different route?
Well, it wasn't even that I decided. I was just taking a lot of music. I think I wanted to, but I had no confidence and I didn't even really think that it was a possibility for me or that I would be able to do it. But I had a lot of people being like, come on, do it.
I mean, at some point, you're the person making the decision. You're not like, Peter Pan.
Right.
Nobody kidnapped you and turned you into a jazz musician.
Right, exactly.
Unless
I
there's
did
a part
make
of
the
the story
decision.
I don't know.
No, I did make the decision, but I made the decision with a lot of friends and mentors kind of encouraging me to do it, just to go for it. And I'm not sure I would have done it without that. I guess that's what I mean. I had really great teachers and a really positive environment, which is what I needed at that time to actually say, okay, I'm going to try to do this.
How was that conversation with your parents of like, hey, this whole science thing isn't working out. I'm going to be a jazz musician.
It's funny. My parents are awesome. And I know I'm very lucky. And I'm sure they were very freaked out, but they were like, okay, this is really what you want to do? Okay. But I think, my dad is a landscape architect. And he's also a painter and a sculptor. Now he's doing a lot of painting now. But I think he kind of wishes that he had been a painter and then ended up being an architect, which he enjoyed. But
Which
I think
is still a creative field to some degree.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I still think he thought, in a way, it was like me going for it. Was like he wished he had gone for a painting career at some point. So I think there was kind of a similarity of like, you want to do this creative thing, you should go for it. And again, yes, he did end up doing a creative thing, but he understood, I think, that I wanted to do that.
What does going for it mean? I mean, do you give yourself, is there a contingency plan when you do that? Or do you give yourself sort of a timeline for things to work out?
I didn't give myself a timeline, but basically when I made the decision when I was in college, I said I should be prepared for the fact that I'm going to be working an office job my whole life. Am I cool with that? If I am, then I'm going to go for it. So I decided I was cool with it, and I did. I had an office job for the first 5 years. I moved to New York. So then when I quit it, because I never had the expectation that I would be able to quit the job.
Yeah.
So when I was able to quit it, it was like amazing. So almost like having low expectations was helpful because I had no delusions that anything was going to be easy or that I would be able to actually be a full-time musician.
Do you still feel like you were committing to it full-time? I mean, how much of a kind of like an after-work and weekends endeavor was it?
I mean, I was so young. I look back on it and think there's no way I could have done that now, but I would work all day in the office. I would come home, like make a pot of coffee and practice all night. And, I was starting to meet musicians and play gigs. So
once you hit 30, like you physically just don't have the energy to do that anymore.
You can't do it anymore.
Yeah. It's literally the one time in your life that you can do something potentially crazy.
Yeah.
Even crazier to do it in New York. I mean, to some degree, like New York is probably the best place to be a jazz musician in the United States, but also the most difficult to, try to eke out a living doing it.
Yeah. Because, it's not an easy place to be. You have to really want to be here. I mean, I love New York. But yeah, you have to really want that. And I think I had the motivation at that time to just be working on music all the time. But also it didn't feel like work. It felt like what I wanted to be doing when I got home from the office.
I have no sense of like how vibrant the current jazz scene is in New York City at this point. I mean, is it a sort of a situation where obviously like now you're established, but is it a situation where any night of the week you can go and sit in or play with someone when you're starting out? Are there that many gigs at the ready?
Well, I guess what you're talking about is more of a jam session kind of thing.
Sure.
If you want to go hear music, for sure, any night of the week, there's going to be many things.
Well, I guess just how many gigs are there and like how difficult is it to really kind of start to establish yourself as a musician?
I think it's very difficult. I mean, the thing that's good and bad about being in New York versus being in a small town somewhere playing is there's so many musicians and there's so many different scenes and different things happening, and it can be really hard to find a community or break into that. Whereas in a smaller place, it might be easier to kind of meet all the other musicians in the town and develop something. But the upside of it is there's just so much happening and so much to draw inspiration from. And if you're interested in a certain type of music, you can find it, and go check it out every night and talk to people. But I think, I do talk to a lot of young musicians that are studying here or maybe studying somewhere else and thinking of moving here, and it is overwhelming for sure. Yeah. And like I said, I think you have to really want to be here. I
think the advice you have to give to somebody who wants to be a professional jazz musician is similar to like when people have asked me about being a writer, which is, it's kind of a cliche, but you only do this if you can't imagine yourself possibly doing anything else.
Exactly.
Because it's just such a hard road.
Exactly.
Do you think that being unique and having a very unique style is an asset when it comes to breaking through?
I think it depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Musically.
I mean, obviously, like in terms of like, I would assume lining up gigs early on, if you can just kind of sit in with people and play their style of music, it's probably easier to establish yourself that way.
Right. I mean, it also, this is again where it's so hard to say because there's no path that everybody follows.
Sure.
Like you could be doing wedding gigs, or you could be doing trad jazz, or you could be teaching lessons, or there's so many different things people can be doing. So it's hard to say kind of what is and isn't the way to do it. I think I kind of found a scene of people and kind of like-minded people and just tried to make music that I think is creative and interesting and keeps me challenged and interested. So that was sort of the path that I found. But there's so many ways to be a musician.
I was reading an interview where, I think you said something along the lines of like somebody asked you whether you could point to other people who were doing something stylistically similar to what you were doing, and you didn't really have any specific examples of that. How would you describe what you do?
I guess it depends on how you frame that question, because at the same time, I do have a community of people where I feel like we speak the same language and are into the same types of things. But, I don't know. I compose music. I play a lot of original music of my own and of friends of mine. A lot of it is influenced by jazz to some degree. A lot of it probably sounds nothing like jazz. I think I'm into the idea of getting away from genre and just making music I think is interesting. And that's in no way like a novel idea. I think that there's a lot of musicians now that are interested in so many things and just interested in, making music. I think the thing that maybe is a common thread between myself and a lot of musicians I work with is that we're interested in composition and improvisation and what the intersection is between those worlds, whether it's jazz or new music or, song-based music, rock music.
When I first heard about you a few years ago, I don't think what you were doing really clicked until I watched video of you doing it.
And I think that's often true, especially I think seeing music live is such a better way to get into it.
Is it hard to translate that to record? Is it hard to take what you're doing and put it on that sort of just audio only document?
I don't think so, but I love recording and I love making records. But I do think there's an aspect of seeing music live that's somehow not there. So I think especially if it's something you haven't heard, seeing it live, you're just going to be able to take in so much of energy, and also just physically seeing what they're doing, I think adds another element. But on the other hand, there's something really nice about a recording, which is a document you make in the moment that you can take the time to perfect in a way that you couldn't in a live performance.
Yeah, as I was mentioning to you earlier, I was reading Nate's book, and you're in the tail end of it, and he highlights the fact that you're sitting down as kind of an important aspect of that. Perhaps some of the maybe difficulty you have, I guess being like not especially visible,
right?
everybody else, in the band standing up, or, if you're in a kind of like a standing room only situation, you could be completely obscured.
Right.
Has that made it difficult?
I guess I've never really thought about it that much.
Yeah. Have you read the book?
Yeah.
To sort of like go back and read that, like that's the thing that he sort of points out as almost like an introduction to you, is the fact that you're sitting down with a guitar.
Right. I remember, that was like a specific situation he was talking about where it was with my octet, so there were 4 horn players and they were all standing, and I was almost maybe buried.
They said like physically, you probably wouldn't be able to stand up.
Right.
And it's like, because you have this like huge hollow body guitar that it just...
Well, that's actually not why. The reason I can't stand, I used to stand when I played when I was younger. The reason I don't stand now is because I have 2 foot pedals that I'm trying to operate simultaneously. So if I stood, I would fall over. So I sort of have to sit down. But I like sitting down. And, you know, I'm often not the only one. You know, the drummer is sitting. If there's a piano player, they're sitting. So I guess I've never thought about it in any way because most of the time you're seen anyway on the stage.
Yeah, I guess probably most of the situations where you're playing are probably people seated for the most part.
Yeah,
Is that right?
most of the time.
So you teach as well?
Mm-hmm. It's been great. I teach 1 day a week at the new school. So I have a couple ensembles, and I really like it because basically it's just running bands. And these students are great. They're incredibly creative. They're amazing instrumentalists, and a lot of them are writing their own music, so we're just working on it.
So you're basically working with kids who have been playing music for some time.
Oh, yeah. Like at a very high level.
Okay.
And I have 2 groups there and just work with the students. And yeah, I've been enjoying it a lot.
So it's more of a situation where you're kind of just guiding them in certain directions?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like lecturing, or it's really just either playing with them or listening to them play and giving them thoughts.
How self-taught were you?
I mean, I'm pretty schooled, I guess you could say. I mean, when I first picked up the guitar, I was teaching myself.
Sure. I mean, that's pretty standard, right?
Right. But then once I started taking lessons at some point. And then, you know, I majored in music in college, and I also spent a year at the new school in jazz school.
By the time you like made the jump in college and decided that you wanted to do music professionally, you were already pretty far into studying. Yeah.
I'd been studying music since probably I started playing violin when I was really young, but I'd been studying guitar since the 7th grade.
And you're classically trained as well?
No. I never actually wish I had played classical guitar. I never did. I played classical violin before that, but guitar I really just started learning jazz.
Why'd you make the jump from violin to guitar?
I didn't like playing in orchestras, and I didn't want to play classical music. I think I wanted to play rock and roll was the initial reason, and then I got interested in jazz. But I think I was interested in improvisation. I don't know, the violin just wasn't resonating.
Rock and roll, like, again, probably would have been like a more straightforward path, right? Just in
maybe.
terms of like opportunities as a guitar player in the world.
Maybe, but it's hard to say. You know, like I said, it's funny if you try to explain to somebody who doesn't know anything about it. You know, I was trying to explain to my neighbor the other day what I do, and
you can't just say, like, I play jazz music. Is that not a straightforward enough explanation? People have some context for that.
Yeah, but then I don't really think I am playing jazz a lot of the time. So
what does that mean?
I mean, I think what I do is influenced by jazz. Yes, that would be the one sentence I would give someone. If somebody wanted a more detailed answer, I probably wouldn't say that.
As you said earlier, like, jazz is it's a broad genre. Mm-hmm. So, like, at what point do you feel like you kind of maybe don't quite fit in?
You know, it's funny, people debate about this a lot, or I think people get worked up about the definition of jazz.
Sure.
And I actually don't really care.
Yeah, but, but it seems like you like almost like prefer to think of yourself as being something outside of that.
Yeah.
Is it just a rejection of genre generally?
I guess what I mean is I'm not too bothered either way.
Yeah.
Like, if somebody wants to call what I do jazz, that's fine. If somebody wants to say it's not jazz at all, that's fine. I guess what I mean is I'm not attached to the idea, because I think it is really hard to define, and it means different things to different people. So when some people say jazz, they mean a very specific kind of music from a specific period of time. For other people, it you know, is more wide-ranging maybe in what it means. So I don't know. I guess what I mean is I think a lot of people get worked up about it, about what it is, because they hold on to a notion of it as being a certain thing. And I don't know. I don't care.
Yeah, there does tend to be this sort of traditionalism around jazz that maybe you don't find with other genres in quite the same way. In that, in some ways, maybe it's most similar to like classical music, where people feel like jazz at Lincoln Center is probably a good example. There's like an academy of it almost. You know?
Well, that's the thing. Now jazz is in schools.
Yeah.
So when you have a school, you have a methodology, and I mean, there is obviously a very strong tradition, but it's not like a hard line.
What's the disconnect when you're talking to this neighbor or this person who just doesn't understand that world at all? Where does it become difficult to really define what you do? Is there something beyond just saying, you know, I'm a touring musician and I teach?
Yeah, see, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But then I guess people tend to have more specific questions, like, how does it work? Or how do you get paid? Or what do you do? You know, it's there isn't really a norm.
Those are all fair questions.
Yeah.
And that's probably something I assume that, like, more than anything else, again, especially living in New York City, that you're probably still doing this to some degree. But when you're first starting, you're kind of cobbling everything together.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, at what point is it clear that you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I can quit the office job and actually do this full time? Where do you have to get to realize that you can just be a musician?
I don't know. You know, it's all very fragile because you can have good months and bad months. I mean, this gets back to the freelance thing we were talking about, where at some point, if you want to do that, you just kind of have to go for it. You know, there wasn't a point where it was very clear to me, okay, now I'm doing all right and I'm going to quit this job. It was more like, okay, I really want to quit it. Okay, I think I saved a little bit of money. I'm going to go for it and see what happens. Yeah. You know, it's more like that. Everything's always kind of unclear. And
getting back to this idea of slowing things down a little bit, you know, and having a little more time for yourself. How far ahead are you thinking generally? How locked in is your schedule look? How many months ahead?
I mean, a lot of stuff gets booked really far in advance. You know, I have some things booked in 2021, but then I also...
As far as gigs or recording sessions?
Gigs or tours or things like that. But I also have a lot of free time or pocket of free time, so then the key is just keeping it free. Yeah. Or, you know, I do want to focus on writing and working a little more on my own projects, so I have to make that time.
Do you still have existential crises, though, when it comes to that? Like, you know, if there is a month or something when you don't have a lot of stuff lined up, are there still moments when it's like, oh, maybe this isn't working out like I had hoped?
You know, actually, no.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
If you feel like this being a professional musician thing is working out pretty
right
well.
Now.
Yeah. But you don't have the time, you feel like, to necessarily pursue your own projects. Are you primarily playing with other people at this point? I mean, are you in other people's bands?
Yeah. It's kind of a lot of everything.
Yeah.
I'm doing my own things. I'm doing other people's things. I have a few collaborative projects. So it's just a matter of managing it and, like I said, just making sure I have time to work on my own stuff.
What's the process for getting something together under your own name? And how much of the heavy lifting do you actually have to do when it comes to booking and recording sessions, things like that? I mean, are you able to delegate?
Yeah, I mean, I have a booking agent, but a lot of the stuff I do myself, just picking a date and asking people if they're free and, you know, trying to schedule something.
Are you sort of like creating a cohesive group in that sense of, you know, the band that plays together on the record is the one that you're going to tour with?
I try to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the situation because sometimes people are busy, but, you know, usually if you plan it enough in advance, I try to keep with the same people.
It's got to be a lot more pressure when your name is on it versus playing in somebody else's band. The success and failures tend to fall on you.
Well, I think in a sense it can be a little more stressful because it's also more responsibility, you know, like you feel responsible for these 5 other people you've brought to Europe and you want to make sure everyone's happy and, you know, suddenly the flight gets canceled and then suddenly everyone, you know, it's kind of on you to figure it out. So I guess it is a little more responsibility in that way, but I also really enjoy it. And I think I've gotten used to it over the years, so it doesn't always feel like that. It just, you know, I have great people. I work with great people that I enjoy hanging out with, and we usually have a really good time.
How organically does the group come together? I mean, you know, when you're sort of sitting down and composing that music, do you have a pretty clear idea of both what instrumentation and the people you want involved in something?
Yeah, I pretty much always know all of that before I sit down to write. So I'll know exactly who it's going to be and what the instrumentation is.
So prior to actually like figuring out what the songs are, the initial germ of an idea comes through the kind of the assemblage of players?
Yes. And then I think that helps you write because you know who you're writing for. So you know the instrumentation, you know the specific musician and how they play and how they sound. So then you can start to visualize their musical voices.
This is an incredibly abstract question. That initial, before you pull everyone together, like what is that, maybe giving a concrete example, like what does that look, if you're describing this group of people and telling them about this project you're working on, what does that look like?
I think I probably wouldn't say much. I'd just say like, I'm thinking about writing some stuff for you and these specific 4 other people or whatever. Are you free?
Yeah, but I guess in your own head, like how do you kind of visualize that group?
I mean, I don't know if I can describe it really. Sometimes it's just hearing a sound, but it's kind of a more general thought of, I think, this combination
it's an
of people.
Aesthetic.
Yeah, I think these combination this combination of
Okay.
musicians would sound good together, and then what could I write that would bring that out, or what are some interesting arrangements or different ways to put all that together and make something cohesive.
This kind of getting back to this idea of maybe like having inspiration when you're not like necessarily sitting down to play. Do you have like notes on your phone? Do you have a bunch of things that you can kind of go back to and pull from?
I think with more general ideas like that, they're just in my head. Notes that I might actually write on my phone would be more... Actually, sometimes I play things. It would be more a specific idea.
Yeah.
I've played on the guitar. I might do that.
You kind of have a library of ideas that you can draw from and pick and choose from?
Sometimes, but often I'll just say, okay, I'm going to compose now, and I'll sit down and just start from scratch in that moment. That's more common.
Is part of dealing with having a pretty busy schedule kind of setting office hours and almost forcing yourself to sit down and play and compose?
You know, I don't really do that. I think it's just... I do it whenever I have the time.
Yeah.
So if I have a chunk of several hours, I'll sit down and write. And sometimes you might sit down and feel completely uninspired, and then you might decide to run scales instead.
Do you find it useful to have a deadline? I mean, and when you start on this project, do you already have dates lined up?
I hate deadlines.
Yeah.
They freak me out. If I have a deadline, like if you told me you have to write a whole bunch of music and you have to have it done in 2 weeks, I would kind of panic and I wouldn't be able to do anything. But if you said, okay, you have to have it all done in a year, I might finish it in 2 weeks. I don't like that idea of having to have it completed, but I like getting things done quickly, but without a specific deadline, if that makes sense.
Once you get to a point where you're going to sit down to start to write songs, you've already alerted all these people to the fact that you want them in the group.
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah, it's just sort of like kind of elusive, like, all right, we're doing this thing now, and maybe I'll be back to you in 2 weeks or a month with some music, and we can start playing.
Yeah, or sometimes I'll even write all the music and then say, you know, if I was doing it now, maybe we have a gig in June.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'd say, all right, we're going to get together in May and rehearse, and then I'll get a sense for what it sounds like. Or maybe I'll say, let's get together in March. I'll have half of the music done, and we can play through it, and it'll help me then write the rest of it once I hear what it sounds like.
Where does recording come into all of this? You know, at what point is it clear that it's time to sort of sit down and actually, you know, put these on record?
It depends. I mean, with the record, I'm about to record a record actually next week. And the way I did this record is we did the tour first. So we did a 2-week tour in October, and it was all new music, and we played it every night and got it to a point that I felt was really strong. And
that sounds
now
ideal.
we're going to go and record it. That is ideal. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Like maybe people in your band live all over the country, and you can only get together in this specific week, and you have the time blocked out, and you have to record.
But I assume that like the style of music that you play is not like going to see the Rolling Stones, where people are going to be mad if you don't play Satisfaction.
Right.
Right. I mean,
that is the nice thing. You're never obligated to play hits because there are no hits.
When you play live, do you kind of go back to the well of her and play older songs, or is it always just like a set of music with a set of people?
Usually the latter. I think I only go back to old songs if I feel like it. But usually everything I write is so specifically for a certain group that I wouldn't do that. And then I'll get sick of playing. If I'm playing a certain book of music with a certain group, I'll get sick of it at some point and want to write something new because I don't want to keep playing the same songs forever.
I guess in a sense, I was going to ask if it's more ethereal that way, but I guess it's not from the standpoint of like you're actually like putting it on record and saving it for posterity in that sense. How often do you write a set of music and it just only exists in that time and place with that group of people?
I think that happens fairly often. Like I'll write a bunch of music, record it, put out a record, play it with the band for a couple years.
But it always gets recorded for the most part.
Most of the time, I really like to record things and have a document of it.
That's got to be, kind of the hard thing about like being a more just strictly improvisational group is having that brilliant night or something and it only kind of like existing for that group of people. Like there's something appealing in that. There's something appealing in just like having it just the people who are there experience it. But you kind of wanted this to get out to as many people as possible.
Well, that's why it's nice to make a recording.
Yeah.
Because like I said, you can take the time to kind of really hone it and try to get something you feel really happy about and, try to make what you consider one of the best versions of that song. And then that is what you would put out there. But you're right, live, night to night, it can be very different. You can have a night that you feel is magical, and another night you feel like you couldn't get anything going, you couldn't play anything.
How much is that is just like kind of the baggage from the day? How much of that is just sort of what you've been going through outside of music?
It's probably a combination. I mean, it's everything. It's the room. Maybe you're in a room that sounds horrible, or you can't hear anybody else on the stage, and you can have some nights, or just the energy in the room can feel really different.
Yeah.
The sound, what you're getting from the audience and from your fellow musicians, it varies so much.
How much freedom do the musicians in your band have, when it comes to playing from night to night? I mean, does their stuff change dramatically, or is it pretty much what's put down on paper?
I mean, it depends on the group. Like with my group Code Girl, which I'm about to record, they're songs. There's lyrics and a singer, and the forms are pretty set. That being said, there are sections that are open and people have solos, and those can be very different night to night. But in general, the song will kind of happen in the same way, but the spaces that are left open will be different, and will kind of gradually change and develop as we move along.
How often do you go back to the same group of people? Once you found a combination that really works, is that something that you want to keep revisiting?
I mean, it depends. This is the second record I'm doing with Code Girl.
Yeah.
I did 2 records with my quintet, 1 record with my octet. It kind of depends. I think I do kind of change projects every couple years, just because it's nice to try something different and challenge yourself.
Does that change the dynamic a lot when there's a vocalist?
This is actually the first time I've ever written for a vocalist. It was a really cool, interesting experience, because most of I guess almost all my projects before that have been instrumental, except for one band I had, which was like an experimental rock band where I sang myself.
How was that experience?
It was cool. I think, working with a real singer, I think I realized, I don't know if I want to sing anymore, but it was fun at the time. I mean, I'm a terrible singer, but it was, for the purpose of that band, it was really fun.
It's already, I assume, just got to be hard to put yourself out there, to just go on stage and play music in general, but to actually sing. I mean, singing in front of people is one of the most difficult things. Even if you're good at it, it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I would imagine, but you get used to it.
Yeah.
I think if you
just felt like that was the right thing for that specific project, to go out and just to attempt to sing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something you would try again?
No, I haven't been feeling like it. I don't want to say I'll never do it again, but no, I have not been into singing myself in recent years. But I really enjoyed writing lyrics and writing for a singer to interpret those lyrics.
Do you play other instruments as well?
No.
Is that something that interests you?
It's just too much. It's like I have enough to deal with just trying to get better at the guitar. So for me, I think I'm more of a one-track person. So to pick something else up it would feel like too much.
As far as instruments go, it's pretty diverse, the things that you can actually do with the instrument.
And that's part of what I like about it.
Yeah.
Is you don't feel boxed in. You can kind of do any kind of music on guitar.
Are there nights when it feels like a job, when you're on tour, when you don't necessarily want to be? I mean, I assume that's the same with any job. I assume, if you're like a race car driver or a baseball player, there are probably times when it's just
there's always things that suck. If you're I had a period this summer where every time I tried to go somewhere, there were thunderstorms and my flight would get canceled and I'd get stuck somewhere. And this was happening so much, I was starting to think there was something like
You're like Charlie Brown walking around with the rain cloud above your head.
No, it was like that for a couple months. And it was so exhausting. I mean, I was getting stuck places and barely making gigs and running and totally stressed out and exhausted. So that's one aspect of being a musician that can suck, is just so much travel and it can be exhausting. People say you really get paid to sit on the planes.
Yeah.
You're performing music for an hour, but you're just traveling constantly, and travel is sort of getting more difficult, I think.
What's the most purely enjoyable aspect of it all? Performing.
I love to perform, and really just playing. I think that's, there's always, with any job, there's always so much other stuff you have to deal with, actually. The logistics of making it happen and getting people together, and that kind of stuff is less fun, but actually just playing, whether it's on a gig or recording, I think that's the part of it for me that's makes it all worth it.
The late flights and all of the other bullshit just kind of tends to fade away when you're actually up there playing.
If you like the gig. The worst is when you've traveled to Europe or something for one gig and the gig is horrible, and then you turn around and go home. So you basically spent 48 hours traveling, and If the 1 hour where you're actually playing is great, it's like, oh, of course, no brainer that you traveled that far to do it. But if you don't feel great about the gig, then it can be tough.